I'm here with Amber Halliday, who is originally from Adelaide, Australia. She's a three-time world champion in rowing and a two-time Olympian, having competed in the Beijing and Athens Olympics. She has obviously a lot of sporting experience, and I also am aware that she's had some significant injuries that we'll talk a little bit more about. Thanks for joining me, Amber.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about your background in rowing and how you got into the sport.
I was hopeless at ball sports. I basically had no hand-eye ball coordination. I tried them all. I loved them all. I loved playing sport. I was sort of okay at cross-country running, and then we sort of got old enough at my school to have rowing open to us. And to tell you the truth, one of my more popular friends was rowing, and she said, "Oh, you should come down and, you could be a coxswain," which is the little person in the boat that gives orders to the rowers. And I quite liked the idea of bossing around my more popular friends. And so I went down and I coxed for the first year until I looked at it and thought, yeah, I think I can do that. I think I can do better than what you're doing it, and than how you're doing it. And so that's how I began.
Yeah. And so how old were you when you got into rowing?
Well, hang on. I was in under 14. So I must have been like late 12s, early 13. You can't really get into rowing much earlier than that.
Why is that?
I'm not sure. I think it's maybe just the practical thing of you don't have the strength. Like, you might not have the strength to move the oar through the water properly, and you might not have the sensibility for water safety. And also, the boats that you start in are generally the heaviest in the boat shed. And so like the little tackers, especially when they're starting out at 13 or 14, they really have trouble holding the boats. I mean, it's probably different these days, but when I was starting out, I started out in the wooden tubs, and they were heavy.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about kind of what kept you interested in going in rowing from your initial experiences.
Well, I think there was a little bit of history there. Like, my dad was a rower, and so I did feel like we had that familial connection.
Yeah.
And I really liked it. It was a totally different sport to any other sport that I had done at school. And I found like a great sense of peace being on the water.
Mm-hmm. And did you compete individually initially or as a team?
No, well, we started off in quad sculls, so 4 people in a boat with a cox.
Yeah.
And then as you grow up through school, you go through the 4s, which is different from sculling because you have 1 oar instead of 2 oars. And then you go into the 8s, which is the biggest boat in rowing. And I was in the first 8. I was lucky to row in the first 8 with my sister. And then in beyond school, I found a pathway through lightweight rowing.
Mm-hmm. And so in rowing, you mentioned lightweight. There's different categories, is there not?
Well, there is at the moment. As of 2020 or 2021, there will be one event, one lightweight event for both men and women at the 2020 Olympics, 2021, you know the ones that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
There'll be one, and then hopefully Thomas Bach, the head of the IOC, will not get rid of that lightweight event for the next Olympics in 2024.
Right. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about some of the progression that you had or your development in rowing from the time that you first started to when you became an elite rower.
The progression, instead of being like that, it was like that.
Mhm.
I mean, I had a really tough time actually proving myself in the very early days. And I think that was because maybe as a junior I was on the small side, and it took me a while, and it took them a while to realize that I might make it as a lightweight. And so I had to struggle through those junior years and get to be a lightweight, and then it took me a while to be good. But it was just a matter of finding the right coach, finding the right training program, and I um, found great improvement when I did.
Yeah.
And so after that, um, I was sort of on a better pathway, and I was more like that pathway.
Right. So, what were some of the challenges or ups and downs that you referred to in, your earlier years? You said it wasn't really a linear or straightforward path. Why not?
No, well, I think the the coaches and the powers that be, like in rowing in Australia, things are done through, well, in my state, they are done through the State Sports Institute. In
Mhm.
other states, they're done through, mainly the pathways through clubs, but in South Australia, where I was, it was done through the South Australian Sports Institute. And the powers that be that were in charge of that institute at the time didn't really believe in me, not in the early days at least. They had invested more money into the people that they identified through talent rather than the people coming through school.
Mhm.
And so I feel like I missed out on a few teams and opportunities in the early days because I might have been close to these talent ID people, but because they had had more money pumped into them, um, I sort of got the bum steer.
Uh-huh.
So I think that was one thing. And the second thing is that I didn't really know myself yet as an athlete. I look back on it now and I'm like, why did I ever believe that I could? you know, but like I said, I feel like I'd got the raw end of the stick, that a saying, the wrong end of
Yeah.
the stick,
Yeah.
a few times, and I feel like I was hard done by,
Right.
with a few competitions and teams, and just getting the opportunities that I thought I deserved in the
Right.
early days. So I just kept going.
What impact did that have on you when you felt like maybe the powers that be didn't see your potential?
Well, it was devastating, and I was this close to giving it up because that was the sensible thing to do. When the powers that be didn't believe in me and I was starting to doubt myself, the sensible thing to do is just to stop this rowing palaver and go to uni and get my degree and go on with my life. But then a coach, very special coach to me, came into my life at that time, and he literally, like, almost literally, he picked me up from the ground, where I think he did come to my house and I was in my PJs at 1 p.m.
Mhm.
Still pretty upset about the whole rowing thing, and he said, why don't you come and do some training with me,
Yeah.
and we'll do a different program, and I've seen you row, and I like the way you row, and so let's do some training together and see what we come up with.
Yeah.
And that
So,
that was a major turning point.
yeah, I think that's really interesting that you mentioned at one point you were considering giving up the sport altogether, and it sounds like you were not particularly happy or in a great frame of mind. And then you met this coach, and it sounds like obviously that was, I guess, impactful in your journey.
Hugely, hugely. He totally changed the course of my life, and I'm so grateful to him.
Right. So what was it that he did in particular, I guess, to change your view on your potential?
Well, I don't think he really changed my view on my potential. It was more like him sort of thinking the same way that I was. Like,
Uh-huh.
I thought I was good at this rowing thing, but we're not quite there yet, but I think I can get there. And he came along and said he was thinking the same thing. Um, so it wasn't quite a change of mind, but what he did do to help me was he listened to me. When I said, I'm ready for, come on, Brewy, I'm ready for some more. Like, give me some more. Give me another lap around the lake. Or, no, Brewy, I think I've had enough today. I'm feeling a bit off. Can we just call it a day? And he would listen to me.
Yeah.
And so that was really important on reflection.
Yeah. And I imagine he must have also had competence or expertise in terms of training and your development as an athlete as well.
Yes, well, and he was an athlete himself. He was a lightweight rower himself, so he had a lot of lightweight tricks and advice to give me, and also like he was very intuitive with his training program. I don't know how qualified he was in terms of sports science or physiology or any of that, and probably where I was as an athlete in those days, I didn't need that level of expertise. I just needed someone who believed in me and someone who would listen to me.
Yeah.
And someone who would give me advice on being a lightweight rower.
And at that point in your career, once you found that individual who was listening to you and believing in you, what were some of the things that started to happen in terms of your results or your success in competition?
Well, in those days, it was basically, I think it was mainly a winter season that we worked together, and this winter season really early in my career was quite crucial. And during the winter season, we would do 5K time trials, so 5 kilometer time trials in our home base. Like, we were lucky to have a 2K course and then almost 3Ks of canals virtually that we would combine together as a 5K time trial. And this was the major metric of that, certainly of the off season. And when I first started with this coach, I was midfield. Oh, and the other thing is that everyone's time was brought down to a prognostic. So it became a percentage of what your own category, the boat speed that is needed for your own category. So that means that different boats could be compared, like a double scull and a single scull and an 8 or a 4. They could all be compared to each other because it all comes down to a percentage. Yeah. And also heavyweight men could be compared to lightweight women, heavyweight women. Everyone was brought down to a percentage. So at the beginning of this off season, I was about midfield, and then by the end of it, I was topping the list, and that was amazing. To, like, you would go do your time trial on a Saturday morning, and you'd come back in, and you'd probably have enough time for something to eat and maybe a coffee, and by then the coaches would have printed out the results, and so to see it pinned up on the boat shed wall and to see my name at the top, that was pretty cool.
Yeah. You mentioned before that, even earlier on, you felt like you had some potential in the sport. Did you always know or have as an aim that you wanted to be a world champion or to be an Olympian?
No. Never. Well, not in those early days. In the early days, it was just about making the state team and getting a red zootie. Like that, a zoot suit is what we wear rowing. And so getting the red zootie was really important. And then it was sort of about, going as far as I could. And then that meant that I found myself actually going for the Australian team. And then all of a sudden, like, I got into an Australian team, and then we went away and we won a world, like a an under 23 world championship, and then it just sort of cascaded from there, and I didn't ever in those days have the belief or the objective of going to the Olympics. It was just about doing my best.
Yeah. And so it was kind of, it sounds like it was sort of this cumulative thing where you would have success at one level, and then and then that led to further success, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Yeah, no, it was absolutely like that. I never let myself believe, I never let myself think too far ahead.
mhm,
And, I had self-belief, but at my level and at the next level, and that's all that I sort of let myself extend to.
yeah,
And so, when it was, once I got that red zooty for the state team, it was about like maybe going to national trials and doing well. And then it was about getting in the team, and then it was about doing well in the team. And then it was about, continuing to the next age group. And then it was about getting into a better boat, and then getting into the Olympic category boat, remembering that lightweight women only have one boat. So winning a world title in a lightweight quad scull is not quite as esteemed as winning a world title or rowing in the lightweight double scull. So it was about, getting in a better boat, and then eventually, once we won the world title in the Olympic boat in 2 years before my first Olympic Games, that's sort of when I thought, yeah, maybe the Olympics is on the agenda for me.
yeah. So would it be fair to say that your goals were very incremental, Amber?
Oh yeah, that's a perfect word.
Yeah. And then you said it was only when you won a, this is a senior world championship, was that in the double scull?
In the Olympic boat, yeah, the Olympic category boat, yeah.
Right. That you then had your eyes kind of set on the possibility of making the Olympics.
Yeah, and remember that, like, okay, it's scary talking these numbers, but this was 2002, and so 4 or 5 years earlier was it was only 4 or 5 years earlier when I was really struggling to get into my state team and my state institute. So, like, to me, that was a pretty quick pathway, being in the Olympic boat, winning a world title, and then so that's why it only dawned on me then that it was like, oh, maybe the Olympics is a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a pretty remarkable progression to, like you say, sort of, make that kind of progress in such a short period of time. Would you say you were surprised by your own success, or not necessarily?
Um, yeah, so, sometimes, but it seems, I don't know, it's hard to say looking back on it. You can look at it both ways. You can, you know, remember your career compressed and go, yeah, that was a pretty good quick progression. But then you can, remember the daily grind, and
Yeah.
then go, yeah, no, it wasn't
Right.
so
Yeah. I guess it depends on sort of how you think of time, or sort of, as you say, kind of what time frame you're thinking of. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, I know in the lead up to the Athens Olympics, you had an injury, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, well, it's tragic. It's a bloody tragedy, because what like we were really well placed coming into the Olympics. That first Olympics, I was well placed coming into both Olympics, but especially that first Olympics. Um, my double partner and I had been together for several years, and we had won the world championship in 2002. We got the silver medal in 2003. 2004 was going to be our year, but she got injured, like a pretty significant career stopping injury.
Mm.
then it took me a while to scrape myself off the floor again. And you know, I went to trials that year, and I was flying. Like, I had one of the best times that trials that any lightweight woman in Australia had done. So I was going well. There was another like rowing partner who was very good quality. Like, her name was Sally Newmarch. She had been to the Olympics twice before. So we ended up in the double scull together, and you know, it was still looking good, despite the fact I had lost my my partner from the previous Olympiad.
Right.
But anyway, so got selected in the boat, going to my first Olympic team, and at 100 days to go before the Olympics, I was riding my bike to training, as I often did, and there was a car who underestimated my speed and came out, and I just went into her passenger side door, and ended up likely breaking ribs and really damaging my preparation. 100 days to go before the Olympics, that's one of the times where you need to go into a hard training phase, and I missed that hard training phase.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad I made it to the start line.
Right. So I want to just talk a little bit more about some of the events surrounding both your injury, but also you mentioned your partner had a serious injury. What happened to her?
Well, the which partner, like my Olympic partner, like with injuries are everywhere in rowing, and
Right.
unfortunately a lot of them come from being on the bike, and which mine did at 100 days to go. And then just when I was starting to come good, my double partner, Sally Newmarch, she had a bike accident, or she just fell off the bike when we were training up in the Swiss Alps. And she, you know, like, rowers' ribs are really important, and even if you just damage them a little bit, you know, it puts your back out. And so she, you know, was carrying this injury as well for the last part of our last chance heavy training period up there in the Swiss Alps.
Okay. Was your injury prior to hers, or was hers before yours?
So I'm confusing the story. So the timeline of it goes, and they're both called Sally, my rowing partners. Sally Corsby was my great partner that I rowed with for the previous Olympiad. She got injured pretty early on in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, we had the trials, which were about March, April trials. Got picked with Sally Newmarch. I had the car, like the bike accident where a car ploughed into me. That was 100 days to go before the game. So what would have that been, like May or something? And then like probably June, July is when we were training up in the Swiss Alps. I was coming good, and Sally Newmarch fell off her bike, and we were both limping to the start line of Athens.
Yeah. So it was a while ago, but do you recall what was going through your mind when you had your bike accident? It sounded like it was just sort of bad timing or wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, I remember I felt I was winded from the impact, but I was straining to get out and yell at this driver, "I'm going to the Olympics! I'm going to the Olympics! How do you, like, you know, I can't believe you did this. I'm going to the Olympics." And yet it probably came out as, "Oh, I'm going to the Olympics." And she, I think she gathered what I was trying to say, and she thought that I was going for cycling. But anyway, it took me a while to accept it, because, you know, I had never been really seriously injured before. I mean, in rowing, everyone's pretty much everyone's got a sore back or sore ribs occasionally, and that's all I had to deal with.
Right.
I think I had plantar fasciitis from running too much as a rower, but there was nothing this major, and this was like a major injury that it took me a while to come to terms with that.
Yeah. So, like, what happened in the immediate aftermath? You go to the hospital, or maybe you can kind of just walk
Well,
me
it
through
wasn't.
what happened.
It was a bad accident, but I was conscious. It wasn't really a hospital job. I don't remember there being an ambulance. I think I just called my parents. It was very close to their house, and which I was still living at the time.
Yeah.
And so they came down, and we went straight to Sports Med, which is it's got a hospital attached to it, but it's a day clinic full of physios and all the allied health professionals.
Yeah.
And where I go to see a physio, or I did at the time, and so we went straight there, and the doctor sort of sat me down and said, well, I think it's likely that you've got 6 bruised ribs, but it's bruised. That means 6 to 8 weeks of modified training. I don't want you running. I don't want you on a bike. I just want you on the recumbent bike, which is like the bike that you do in a seat.
Yeah.
For the next 4 weeks at least. And so I was going, oh my God, I have to do a recumbent bike for 2 or 3 times a day for the next 4 weeks. How boring. But I was also grateful that the timeline worked out that I might just make it back in time.
Okay. So you also mentioned that there was some difficulty accepting what had happened. Like, was that something that you were able to sort of wrap your mind around within a few days, a week, or was it a longer process?
Well, I guess it was in the next week that I the gravity of the situation came down, and I had a few low moments, but then there wasn't really time to wallow. I had to get moving and move on, because I had this deadline of the games.
Yeah.
And it only just worked out that, with the recovery, I would only just make it back in time. And it was I was cutting it so fine that they wanted me to compete at the World Cup, which is sort of the warm-up competition to either the World Champs or the Olympic Games, and it's usually about 6 weeks before, and it's in Switzerland. The last World Cup is usually in Switzerland, but instead of rowing the double scull there, they had me, Rowing Australia had me race the single scull there, and so that was sort of like an in between. That was a major progression in getting back into the double. I think their reasoning was the single scull, you sort of move, you don't have to move as quick because it's not as a faster moving boat as the double scull.
Mm-hmm.
So the single scull, you can you can get away with a few of your own idiosyncrasies about your technique in the single scull that you can't really in the double scull. So that was the important stage, and I felt like I only just made it.
Mm-hmm. So, excuse me, did you still have, I guess, some hope or optimism? You mentioned you had this accident 100 days out, and then you had to modify your training with the recumbent bike. Was there still some sense of optimism that, okay, I can still do this? Or, did your kind of thoughts and emotions maybe change over that period of time?
The expectation totally shifted. It had shifted, back at the beginning of the year when I lost Sally Crosby to a major injury.
Yeah.
And it became less about an Olympic medal and more just about, getting to the Olympics.
Right.
Although I'd even back then, it wasn't so much about the Olympic medal. It was still about getting to the Olympics, but it was like when I lost Sally Corsby, it was like losing a leg. And so I still had to make it to the Olympics even with one leg.
Yeah.
And so I made it in the team, and then had, you know, got another leg back being in the team with Sally Newmarch, and then it was like losing the other leg, having a bike accident. So it was generally, I'm losing the plot here. It's about a shift in expectations.
Yeah.
Like, instead of focusing on being at the Olympics and having a result at the finish line, it became so much more about being at the Olympics and lining up on the start line.
Right. Was that sort of a hard shift in expectations to make or to come to terms with? Because it sounded, like you said in the lead up, you were world champion, then you won the silver medal the year prior, you were going gangbusters from the sounds of it, and then you sort of had your partner getting injured, your own injury. Was that difficult to kind of shift those expectations?
Probably not really, because I didn't get too carried away with thinking about the finish line anyway. I didn't get too carried away with being in the Olympic team when I wasn't yet in the Olympic team. And then I didn't really have a lot of time in between making the Olympic team and my own accident to think too much about results or anything. It was just about making the best of the situation.
Yeah.
And then the bike accident happened, and so it was all about making the start line.
Right. So would you say that your thinking was sort of just more kind of proximate or short term, because, like in this case, after your injury, you didn't have too much time, I guess, as you said, to sort of wallow in your sorrows or, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was a statement or a question.
well, I'm not sure. Like, on reflection, the timing. Yeah, I don't know what you're trying. Can you ask a question again?
Yeah,
I don't know.
sure. I guess I'm just wondering whether it sounded like your thinking was a little bit kind of short term always, and I'm wondering if that's the case, like in terms of your goals, or like you said that it wasn't so hard to modify your expectations, and I wonder if that's a function of the fact that you weren't thinking too far ahead into the future.
Yeah, well, on reflection in my career, it's as though I never let myself think too far ahead, because I didn't want my expectations to get too high and then come in below. Like, I'm a person, it's sort of my style to set low expectations and then exceed them, or to try and exceed them. So,
Right.
I'm not like an aim for the stars sort of person, and then see where I get. I'm like what is realistic, what is scientifically possible. Like, let's study these race times and these ergo times, and what is absolutely realistic. Okay, how can I exceed it? And so I guess, like, to put it in another way, I quite often use this mountain climbing analogy. So imagine that an Olympic team or an Olympic medal is the top of the mountain, and it, when you're first starting out in the elite sport pathway, you're right at the bottom of the mountain. And I was the sort of climber who would look at the top of the mountain and get a little bit intimidated by it, and so I'd go, no, okay, I'm just going to make it to that ledge over there. Okay, back, focus down here, one foot in front of the other, and I'll make it to that ledge. And then, but that doesn't mean that I can't ever allow myself to look up at the top. But I would look up at the top and just go, okay, let's go to that ledge. Let's go to the next ledge. One foot in front of the other.
Right. So it sounds like, again, for you, just segmenting things was sort of your approach to things, right? Like breaking down the mountain into smaller components or pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, Yeah, I mean, dreaming was a part of it, dreaming about your goals, but it wasn't a big part,
Right.
not for me.
And so going back to this period where you know had the injury with the crash with the car and your ribs are bruised and you're modifying your training, what happens then in the days and weeks before the Olympics? And maybe you can talk a little bit about what happened at the Olympics.
I'm sorry, you cut out
Oh,
just a
sorry.
little bit there in
Yeah.
the
So I'm just curious, kind of, if you can talk a little bit more about kind of the progression after your injury with the car or your car crash. You said you started training on the recumbent bike, and so then also I guess you went to you competed in the uh, single skull, right? So I'm just
yeah.
wondering if you can talk a bit about kind of what else happened before the Olympics, and then maybe describe what happened at the Olympics.
Yeah, well, I think it was probably the fact that we were on quite a tight deadline that made the timeline of this all quite crucial, and like there wasn't a lot of wiggle room, and that was helpful in a way because I couldn't afford to lose my motivation and to skip too many sessions on the recumbent bike because
Mhm.
there just wasn't the time to make up that training.
Yeah,
And you know, as you would be aware, rowing is a sport that requires so much training. And so anyway, it was just about getting. I felt a lot of it was just getting the training in,
yeah,
especially because you know my partner was out there on the lake with the reserve doing the Ks, and I had to do like as much as I could in my modified training. So that kept me on track for those weeks where I was out of the boat. And then it was just about gently easing myself back into, you know, doing sit-ups or pulling this weight or, you know, working on the TheraBand in this way, and then maybe getting into the single skull in training and very gently doing 4Ks, 8Ks, you know, 12Ks. And because I had seen so many rowers have rib stress fractures before, like not from impact like my injury was, but they rib stress fractures in rowing is huge, and I think it just comes from like having imbalanced muscles or something or other. You give yourself a stress fracture. And I had seen, and basically my recovery protocol was the same as I had seen everyone else go through. And I had seen a number of girls come back from rib stress fractures too quickly.
mhm,
And that meant that they were sent backwards
yeah,
and their recovery ended up longer. And I knew that I couldn't afford to have many of those failures.
you're right.
And so that was something keeping me super responsible and not getting carried away with wanting to do too much or being too brave to put up with pain. It was just about listening to my body and paying attention to what it was telling me.
Yeah, and you know, it sounds like having some of those role models or previous examples, was that helpful for you in terms of not getting ahead of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I looked at their mistakes, and that's what helped me not make the same mistakes as
Right.
them. I mean, like I said, I had seen it so many times before where somebody goes back into training from a rib injury too quickly. And in a sport like rowing, it's, you just can't get away with it.
Right. By the same token, did you have any concerns about what the modified training would mean for your ability to compete?
Well, yeah, sure. I I did. Why wouldn't you? But I
Yeah.
didn't pay too much. I didn't give it too much time because it was something that I couldn't change. I couldn't control it. So I just, by that stage of my career, I had learnt not to spend too much thinking time on the uncontrollables, and that
Mhm.
was that was an uncontrollable. Um, regret and what ifs, they're all uncontrollables and they're all pointless.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting. I guess, you said that was something you learned how to do. Is that right?
Yeah, well, but by that stage in my career, like, you don't always start off knowing that. I mean, I hope that many young athletes do know that straight off the bat. And I think that's really important. But after a while, you get to know yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it is pointless worrying about things that you can't control.
Right.
So, and we, being a rower, you really get close to your limit of energy expenditure in day-to-day training. Like, there's just not a lot left over for anything, particularly about worrying about things that you can't control.
Yeah. So you mentioned, Amber, the importance of learning to know your body and listen to your body. I like how you phrase that. And I'm wondering if, um, you know, pain management or kind of understanding your pain was important in helping you manage your injury, or in this case, kind of effectively recover, to get back for the Olympics.
Yeah, well, pain management is an interesting term because, like, and we tended to talk about pain as good pain or bad pain.
Mhm.
Like, the good pain was the pain in the quads that you got after like a really hard 500-meter piece, or that really like dull aching after a really hard week of the training program, or the DOMs that you get after doing a new weights circuit. But bad pain is the twinge, the little ache, the something funny happening with your joints, or a little strain that is like, oh, no, that didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. Pain in my quads from physical expenditure feels right,
Yeah.
but a little tweak in my back or my ribs or my intercostal muscles or something, we had to pay attention to stuff like that, and
Mhm.
maybe modify our training straight off the bat. Like, I would say to my coach, like I said, everyone in rowing has almost everyone in rowing has back problems, and and like, so when I felt that twinge, I would have to get up the courage actually to tell my coach, no, I don't think I'll do this last 10-minute piece on the ergo. The ergo is very hard on my back, and so no, sorry, Adrian, I don't think I've got this twinge. I don't think I should do the last 10 minutes on the ergo. How about I go for a run or do it on the exercise bike instead, or
Yeah.
something rather. And so yeah, I guess I've gone a long way from pain management, but being aware of your own body and having the courage to speak up about it, I
Yeah.
think, is very key in a sport like rowing,
Yeah.
particularly.
Well, I want to pick up on that point about having the courage to speak up in a sec, but it also sounds like you would have descriptors or adjectives to describe or differentiate the good pain that you mentioned from the bad pain. And but I wonder if that's important, or it almost sounds like it has value in, you mentioned when you could describe your pain as like a twinge or tweak, or like something like that, that would then lead to modifications in the training.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was considered or described as more of a good pain, that might be something that you could then just continue to train through. Is that
Yeah,
accurate? Or?
yeah. No, that's exactly right. I never really thought about it in that way, but yeah, we like words like even like burning, like that was good pain because you
Mhm.
you burned in your lungs, your quads burned, your arms and your lats burnt, or whatever. Especially when you're getting to like the last rep of your set or something or other, that was part of pushing through the good pain.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's words like twinge and tug and like a strange sort of feeling, or like a discomfort. Those sorts of descriptors are the ones that were tending to describe the bad pain.
Yeah. Would you say then, Amber, that it's almost helpful for the injured athlete to be able to describe their pain or to classify it or categorize it so that they have a sense of what they should be pushing through, what they need to back off from?
Yes, absolutely. And I totally got my pain vocabulary not from my coach, but from talking with other athletes and talking with my physio.
Yeah.
She was quite insightful. My physio, I was really lucky to see who someone was based in my hometown who was actually a Rowing Australia national team physio. And so she had a really good vocab about pain and bodily sensations, and she would sort of she knew where rowers tended to hurt anyway, and what was good pain and what was bad pain. She had built up that knowledge, and it was also about finding words from other athletes as well, talking about our own pain and what was good and what was bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that term pain vocabulary, or being able to develop it through interactions with people like a knowledgeable physiotherapist or teammates who have similar experience. I also thought it was interesting you mentioned the courage, I guess, to, speak up about your pain. And, I'm wondering if in rowing, I imagine there's sort of a culture of training through or pushing through pain. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Would that be
there
an
is.
understatement based on your reaction?
Um, I can't imagine it would be too much different in other sports, but I mean, rowing is a sport, like I said, that requires a lot of training, and you feel tired, you feel at your limit most of the time. It it is, so it's incredibly hard in that way. But sorry, what was the question again?
Well, yeah, I was just asking kind of about the culture of, I guess,
Yeah.
rowing and,
So,
and you know,
and in terms of speaking, like listening to your own body and speaking up for the bad pain that you would be feeling, like, I guess in one way you had to be confident enough in your own insight into your own body to
mhm,
do that, and then you had to remind yourself that this is better for the long term, to speak up now and to save myself an injury that might cause me to lose a week of training or a week out of the boat or whatever with a sore back. It's better to speak up now than do that. And so then you just had to ignore the fact that you in a sense you weren't keeping up with your teammates
mhm,
because you're not doing the same amount of them on the ergo, and the ergo being the rowing machine.
yeah,
Um, so in a sense, you weren't keeping up with them, and that was one of the hardest things that I had to let myself come to terms with, or that's one of the hardest things I had to come to terms with, is the fact that I might not be keeping up with my teammates because I might be, listening to my body, and I'm going to save myself a week out of the boat if I speak up to my coach now and
yeah,
say,
right. So did you feel pressures at times to keep up with your teammates? And if so, was that an internal pressure, was it more external in nature?
it was both, but it particularly came from, I mean, my coach had really good results with our category. I think because he was so hard on us and he had us train next to each other. Like, we trained most of the time in single sculls, and we trained next to each other on this lake, and he would cap our rating at something unbelievably low. Like, so if you imagine a rowing boat paddling, they're probably rating about 20 strokes a minute, 18, 20 strokes a minute. He would have us go down to 14 and just rip it through the water, trying to compete with each other to get to the finish line first on this 2K stretch that we had for our training lake.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of quiet rivalry, respectful, quiet rivalry in amongst the training squad.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that he kept a big training squad, and at the end of the day everyone's going for 2 seats at the Olympics.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting dynamic, but ultimately it made us all better having to compete with each other.
Right. I guess it also sounds like it was something, I guess, in the case of injury where you had to be cognizant of not pushing yourself too much in certain instances as well.
Yeah, I think there were certain things about my coach's training program at the time that were really, they could easily inflame an injury that was like a back injury or a rib injury, and that was the amount of ergos he had us do on the land in the afternoons, and in the mornings it would be the low rating stuff that he would have us do. Like, he basically made us rate low because he wanted us to practice rowing hard through the water, but he didn't want us to be like at a really high heart rate for the majority of the training. So the majority of the training was like rip it through the water, but then you just have to come forward so slowly that you're only going to be rating 14 strokes a minute. So it was an interesting philosophy. Like, it did work in a lot of ways, but it's very hard on your back and ribs.
Right. And just going back again to the lead up to Athens, so you had that modified training, and maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of what happened prior to the games and talk about your experience at the Olympics.
Well, prior to the games, like I said, the tight timetable just kept me on track. 4 weeks solidly on the recumbent bike, and then it was like a 2-week gentle transition of like eventually making it back into the boat. And then I can't remember, like maybe I had a week or half a week of training in the single scull. I don't remember going anywhere near the ergo at this stage, but it was like training in the single scull and just getting back up to speed, and then perhaps doing like a 500-meter piece before we left for overseas, and then getting to Lucerne, where I was going to, this was the final World Cup before the Olympics, and I was to compete in the single scull. And then it was just about like not embarrassing myself in the single scull, because everyone who you were going to compete against at the Olympic Games was there in the double scull, and they were looking at you in the single scull going, yeah, will that Australian crew ever make it to the start line at the Olympics, you know? And so anyway, ended up with a bronze medal in the single scull at that World Cup. So that was very reassuring. And then it was just a matter of like, okay, I think, you know, that was the stage where I could almost ramp up to full training up there in the Swiss Alps. And then my partner had her accident, so it was like, oh, come on. And so I think by that stage I had lowered my expectations so much that I was just happy to be on the start line at Athens.
Yeah, and then talk a little bit, if you would, about what happened at Athens.
Yeah, well, we were, you know, first Olympic race, and first race together, actually. Sally and I had not rowed the double very much. We had never raced before. In previous seasons, I don't think we'd even seat raced together in a double scull together. So this was our first race, and it was a massive tailwind. And a lot of people were worried about too much water coming in the boat. So we had all these plastic sort of protective things around the boat. And I was like, oh, you know, what is this going to be? Did our race, and we won in a world's best time. So that was pretty cool. And like, I don't think it ever really hit me. I mean, by the time it hit me, we were rowing the semi-final, which was also a massive tailwind, and we won that. And you know, so it was like, you know, maybe we're being a semi-final winner. You are traditionally looked at in the final as one of the favourites, and then we line up for the final and it's dead flat. And I think that's where our lost training caught up with us, because it was less about technique and it was more about brute force and strength and fitness. And we didn't have that, so we came fourth.
So in a couple of the preliminary heats, you broke a world record, and then you won the semifinals. I guess before the finals, were you starting to think, oh, you know, things are looking pretty good here, or things are looking up, or I guess what was your mindset kind of going into the finals?
To tell you the truth, like, I don't remember thinking much that one way or the other. Like, being a lightweight rower, a lot of your thoughts are taken up by being hungry and by food and by managing your weight leading up to the race. So that's a really good, I considered it like an anxiety management technique, that because so many of my thoughts would be around that, I didn't actually ruminate on the race, or you know, think too far ahead with possibilities about racing that much, because I was hungry.
Yeah.
and so maybe we did get interviewed by a TV crew outside the accommodation where we were staying. We were staying out near the rowing course, not in the village at that stage. And this TV crew was interviewing us, and I think they brought up gold medal favourites, the term gold medal favourites, and I was like, yeah, you know, and that made me think a little bit. But then I went back to my room and went back to being hungry and started dreaming about what I was going to eat after the next race. So
Yeah.
It was, you know, something that just passed by.
Right. So, you know, I obviously being in a hungry state, you know, can have a way of directing your focus.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you say that was actually an anxiety management technique. So sort of keeping your focus just on something very specific or tangible like food, as opposed to all the what ifs. How did it feel, I guess, coming forth? Was that a moment of satisfaction? Was it, you know, did you?
It sucked.
Yeah, how would you describe it?
It sucked. Like, in rowing, you have 6 lanes in a race, and so, you know, and when you come first, second, or third in a final, you row up to the pontoon to get your medal after the next race has passed. Like, rowing in World Cups, in World Champs, in Olympic Games, they stick to this schedule all the time. And because, like, I guess I had so much success leading up to the games, there was not once that I remember having to row away without rowing up to the pontoon and getting my medal. So even just before at the World Cup in the single scull, I still, you know, finished the race, and then you row up to the pontoon and collect your medal. So the other, when you have to row away, I think some of us called it the row of shame. And so that was the first time I actually had to do the row of shame, coming forth at the Olympic Games after being gold medal favourites. And we rowed around the corner on this row of shame, and it was very silent between Sally and I, because we were just in shock. And then, you know, a TV crew or a media crew stopped us and wanted to interview us. And I was like, I guess I'm pretty happy about like the pain and the raw emotion that I was feeling at the time didn't, and the bitterness that I would later come to feel about my accident, about Sally's misfortunes, about, you know, my other Sally's loss and everything. None of that came through in this exchange between this reporter and us. And I was just so glad that I had the frame of mind to say, you know, we're just so happy that we made the start line. This regatta, we're so happy we made the start line. And that's what it came down to.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were still in shock at that stage. And I think, you know, it took me almost the whole second week of the games of just wallowing and feeling sorry for myself to actually, you know, realize, wow, I'm at the Olympics. My competition is done. It's just partying from now. It's being with my friends. It's celebrating the last 4 years plus of training, and it took me a while to get to that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, you know, you mentioned kind of bitterness, I guess, over things that had happened, and kind of after the I guess it was not easy, I imagine, to kind of come to terms with that. Would that be right?
yeah, it was hard. It definitely changed my career direction. I'm sure if I had, well, actually, I'm not sure, but if we had got a medal that day, I wonder whether I would have gone another 4 years. But because we just missed out, I thought, you know, I can't stop on this.
Yeah.
You know, there's no money, there's no glory in rowing. So, you know, when you're 24, which is what I was at the Athens Olympics, you need to think seriously about your career and moving forward with your life, and maybe looking at having children or something in the next Olympiad. But after that result, I was like, I can't walk away from this now.
Yeah. So it left you with the feeling that that wasn't the way you could kind of end your career, or was that like, you know, you talked before that you weren't very long term in your thinking. Was there some part of you that thought, okay, well, if this goes well, that'll be the end of my career, and then that didn't happen, and so it changed your frame of mind, or not necessarily?
Yeah, no, I hadn't really thought explicitly about it, but I think I I'm not sure. I think my goal, rather than having a goal in rowing to like win a world championship or to make, you know, however many teams, or to make 3 Olympic games, or to, you know, win an Olympic medal, which, you know, sort of was the goal, win an Olympic medal, but it came down to reaching my potential.
Yeah.
So when I realized, like when we set a world's best time in the heat and when we won the semi, my potential, like looking at the facts scientifically, my potential was winning an Olympic medal.
Yeah.
But I didn't reach my potential when it mattered.
Right.
And so, like, I guess because I hadn't achieved that result of reaching my potential, you know, that's what made me firm up on the idea for going for another 4 years.
Right. So the fact that it was kind of potential unrealized was
Yeah.
what kind of crystallized in your mind the fact that, you know, you wanted to continue for another 4 years, and kind of right that wrong, if that would be the right expression. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you did compete in a second Olympics, right? What um, I imagine, of course, there are a lot that can happen in a 4-year time frame, but maybe you could just summarize some of your highlights between, what happened in the next 4 years in terms of some of your successes during that period.
Yeah, well, I guess the next 4 years was pretty straightforward. A lot of our strong squad from the previous Olympiad had moved on or fallen off or retired or gone by the wayside or whatever, or they had gone on with their careers and having children and everything like that. But I had hung around, and there was pretty much only one potential world-class athlete left in us in the lightweight landscape in Australia. And so she and I ended up in a boat together. We trained together in my home base of Adelaide, and I had a year off in 2005. So I wasn't around in 2005. She rode with another girl and did averagely at the World Champs. And then I came back and made the team with her in the double scully in 2006. We won a silver medal. 2007, we won a gold medal. This is at the World Championships. So again, not exposed to the row of shame. And then for the Olympic year, it felt differently. Our coach went a little bit crazy about his training. I actually did the training. I didn't have those moments where I had to stand up to him and say, look, that's enough, I've got to tweak. It basically came down to the ergos that we were doing in training. They were on these sliders, which made it easier on your back. So it was overall a good thing to train when you're training on the ergo, to do it on these sliders. And it was a lot more like the feeling in the boat. And it also, it helped my back ache. It helped my back not ache or twinge so much. And so I did everything on the program that year. And, we went to our coach and sort of said, we're just tired, we're moving slow, can we change up the program? He said no. We went to a head coach at in Australia. The head coach literally went like this and said, there's no controlling your coach, Amber. He's a Romanian so-and-so. No, there's no controlling him. And I think there was controlling him, but they just didn't really care about us, or I don't know why, because we were world champions at the time and we were saying, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like last year did. Anyway, and then we went to the Olympics and we had a bad row in the semi-final and didn't even make the final.
And so you attribute that just to overload, too much training, not having enough energy, or what happened?
Yeah, well, all I can do is compare 2007 to 2008, and 2007 was, in 2007, something strange happened actually. At the Lucerne Regatta, which is the lead up, the World Cup lead up to the World Champs, they thought that I had glandular fever, and so I had to take some time away from my coach and remain down at sea level in Italy while my partner and the coach went up to the Swiss Alps for altitude training. And I stayed down for a few weeks in Italy while the tests came back and while they sort of figured out what was happening with me. I mean, ultimately, I still don't know what was going on. I just felt really fatigued and awful at that stage. But, I had this week down in Italy, which was great, away from my coach and my teammate. And then went back up, got stuck back into training, and we went and won the World Championships. So I wonder whether that week off, essentially, had anything to do with our performance at the World Championships.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe for those last 2 years, he was overtraining us and he wouldn't listen to us when we said we're not feeling great. You know, maybe we don't need this much. And I, at the time, like in the Olympic year, I was 28. So, you know, there I was saying to him, like, I don't feel as though I need as much training as I did as a 22-year-old, as a 24-year-old.
Right.
Like, can you please back off? Can I please have some time to myself, or, you know, some alternate training sessions?
Yeah.
And he wouldn't listen to me. So
Yeah.
we ended up second in the B final, which is overall 8th.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I guess after that experience, how does it leave you feeling, I guess, at the end of it, you know, in 2008? What's your mindset, I guess, after the, I imagine, disappointing, if that would be the right
Well,
word.
I can't use too many bad words here, can I? But yeah, pretty annoyed, pretty frustrated, disappointed. I was very frustrated. No one would listen to me, and you know, I feel in retrospect, at the time I wasn't sure, but in retrospect, I can see it so clearly now that, you know, if my coach, if the powers that be at Rowing Australia, the head coach, if they had listened to us, like, I'm sure it would have been a different result. But at the time, we weren't we weren't confident enough to really push it, and we didn't really have the power to, because you know, in rowing you don't have the power to fire your coach.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really funny because we have athlete liaison officers at the Olympic Games, which is where another, like a high profile athlete, maybe from a non-Olympic sport, comes in and just acts as a sort of conduit between the Australian Olympic Committee and athletes and whatever. And we had the captain of the Australian cricket team, Steve Waugh, there, and we were telling him at the Olympics what we think might have happened with our race and our previous year. And, you know, we were saying how no one would listen to us when we said that he was training us too hard, and his idea, this cricketer's idea was, oh, couldn't you just fire him? And it was like, no, Steve, no, we can't fire our coach. We are not the professional athlete that you are in cricket. And unfortunately, we had no power.
Right. And so, you know, I guess kind of in terms of your path or your trajectory, then what, you know, what happens at that point? Because I know you said in 2004, you felt like, okay, this isn't how I want to finish off my career, and it sounds like you still have the drive to go for another 4 years. What about in 2008?
Well, I think I was at a different stage in my life as well. I was engaged to someone at the time who was expecting me to stop after that Olympics, and we would then, you know, get married and have babies and whatever. And I think, you know, I just came home. I was so bitter. I was sort of searching, I guess, for a shorter term therapy to get me through that hard stage of coming home a loser in my mind. And so I joined the cycling team in SASI, in our sports institute in South Australia. It was pretty easy to go sideways. You know, you would see coaches of other sports in the lab or in the ergo room or in the gym. You know, you could speak to the sports scientist that took care of you as a rower and sort of discuss with him about going to a sport like cycling and what would it take. And anyway, so I found myself going over to cycling, and pretty quickly doing well there. And I liked cycling. It was a good therapy in that it was exercise. It helped me through like an awful stage for lightweights, which is returning home from overseas on race weight, all skinny and like strong. And then and then you go through an off season where um, you do have the potential to stack on the weight and you feel awful. And so it helped me through that. It was really good social interaction with other athletes that you didn't really get in rowing. In rowing, it was all business and you couldn't really chat as you were training in a rowing boat where you're looking at the back of somebody's head, and you were too puffed to talk. And so I really enjoyed cycling for those reasons. And I ended up going a bit further in cycling, just to see what I could do.
Yeah. And I know in terms of your cycling career, you had some success, but I also know you had some traumatic injury as well. Maybe you can speak to both your success and the injury that you incurred.
Yeah, well, the success was sort of cool. I won a tour in 2009, I think, of New Zealand, and I was pretty much set on time trialing because I didn't like being in the peloton. Too many moving parts, too many things I couldn't control, and too much potential for danger. And so I liked time trial, and so I won a national title in time trial a couple of years into the cycling thing, and so that was kind of cool. And I thought I might make it to the world champs, which in that year were in Australia, and I was pretty keen on that because I was a bit young for the Sydney Olympics, and so I wasn't ever trying out for the Sydney Olympics. But that was cool to have a home games or a home, like we never had home World Cups in Australia or anything. But to have a cycling world champs that was at home in 2010, like that was cool. That became my new aim, but they didn't pick me. And so I thought, up yours. I'm just going to do this one last race, which was a race that women's cycling was trying to get profile through this race, which was sort of run in parallel to a high-profile tour. It's called the Tour Down Under. In Australia. And so I thought I'll just do that, and then I'm going to go back to rowing and try and see if I can make the London Olympics. And I had a bad crash, it was so stupid. Like I don't remember it at all. But it was on a flat track that was closed to all traffic. It was like one of the safest sort of situations you could be in. And I fell awkwardly and I landed on my temple and ended up with bleeding on the brain, a traumatic brain injury, or I think it was classed as a severe traumatic brain injury. And my optic nerve on this left side got messed up, and this whole left side still doesn't move properly almost 10 years on. And at the time I was in a induced coma for a few days in ICU, and then they had me in hospital for 2 months. A month of that I couldn't remember because I was in post-traumatic amnesia. And then towards the end of the 2 months in hospital, it was only then that I started to grasp that this wasn't like a serious injury, like rowing serious injury, where you're out of the boat for 4 to 6 weeks and then on modified training or whatever. It was like a lifelong injury.
What impact has it had on your life?
Well, it changed it. It stopped all my career. You're gonna make me cry. It changed everything.
And it seems like it's still hard to speak about. Um, do you have any recollection of some of your first thoughts when you were in the hospital? Because it sounds like quite a fuzzy time.
It was like being in a cloud,
Mm.
and very gradually the clouds started to clear and you got like a better sense of what was going on. For the whole month I didn't know, like I was apparently learning how to walk and talk again, but I don't remember how to do that. And I remember, like, at the time, I apparently remembered who my mum was and my dad and my boyfriend. And like, you remember things from your long-term memory, but you don't really remember things from day to day. So that's why I don't have any, like, I couldn't encode any new memories from that time. So I don't remember it at all.
Right.
And then eventually, the clouds started to clear, and instead of me saying, oh, maybe the Olympics is still a possibility, I don't know, we'll see how we go over the next few weeks, to no, this is going to be with me for 10 years down the track, and here I am 10 years down the track.
Yeah. When what was it like, I guess, when that realization was becoming clear that this was something that wasn't just about your sport, but about just your life and quality of life?
Yeah, that probably, I think that probably came after I came out of hospital, and even after I finished, I did 6 months of outpatient rehab after that, and it took me like 9 months to get back to driving, and then 12 months to get back to work. And so sort of by the end of that period, it was like, yeah, this is a lifelong injury. This is not a 6 to 8 week rowing rib injury that I can work through. Like, this is going to be here forever. And I fell in a few holes, but ultimately, like, it was something I couldn't control.
Mm.
Like, I just tried to stick. It was hard, but I tried to stick with that mantra of controlling only the controllables.
Hmm.
And I couldn't control going back in time and changing anything. I couldn't. Once I figured out that I couldn't control, like, I couldn't have any influence over my eye, it was always going to be like this. It was always going to be light sensitive and not move properly. Like, I could move on from that. Like, it was like a really hard time of coming to realizations about what my new limitations were,
Hmm.
and then trying to turn them around.
Yeah. And is that something that you still contend with today, kind of trying to, deal or cope with limitations, I guess?
Well, not so much. Like, I'm really trying here in Utah to get into mountain biking. My husband
Hmm.
is into mountain biking big time, and so I'm trying as well. And it is incredibly frustrating to not be the athlete that I once was, and not only be 10 years post retirement unfit, sort of non-athlete, but also to deal with this left side that tends to clench up when I get emotional, or when I get angry at myself, or when I'm trying really hard. It clenches up, and it makes it hard for me to do what I want on the bike.
Yeah.
So that is, I mean, that's not a big deal either. The big deal is I can't keep up with my 4-year-old anymore when he's running away from me. I can't, like, run after him and catch him, um, which is not so much of an issue anymore because I can threaten him with my voice. But but when he was a toddler and he didn't understand that running towards the road would freak me out, like, yeah, it was a sad day when I couldn't keep up with my toddler anymore.
Yeah.
And apart from that, I just have to wear sunglasses every time I go outside. Like,
Hmm.
even going next to an open, like a light window, put on my sunglasses, and it's no big deal. Like I've tried to grow from it a lot more than I have shrink from it, or whatever the opposite of grow is. Like I've tried to grow from it rather than spend too much time in the hole wallowing in bitterness. I've tried to make something of it.
Yeah. And how have you managed to do that? Like, I know you mentioned things like having a mantra, but are there other things that maybe facilitate the growth that you refer to?
Well, to me, it's all entwined with the psychological skills that you gain through sport.
Mm-hmm.
So with a lot of the psychological skills that you gain through sport, I mean, it's all about performance and resilience. And so I reflect back on them and I remind myself that I have them. I have since done a degree, not a degree, I've since done a PhD in the area of positive psychology. And so a lot of that didn't make me learn new stuff. It made me realize what I had known about the power of gratitude, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, to me, it's, I have just tried to combine these psychological skills that result in resilience, performance, and well-being into something that I want younger athletes to know this as well.
Yeah. I mean, and that sounds like a rather impressive accomplishment, getting a PhD, given what I'm sure must be, some debilitating symptoms cognitively or
Yeah,
otherwise
my
from your
memory
injury.
was so bad at the beginning. Like, it's still pretty bad, but it's so bad at the beginning.
Yeah. Was that, like, I know doing a PhD has its challenges and ups and downs as well. So, I mean, I guess in terms of the fact that you had such a severe brain injury, would you say that made concentrating difficult, or like, I don't know, in terms of just your symptomology, did that make the challenges of a PhD maybe all the more difficult, or?
Well, I always thought back to my sporting career and achieving the Olympics from that. I was written off early in my career. I was crappy at sports at school. I was in the veggie PE class at school, and I reflect back on that, and well, I made the Olympics, like, because I'd worked hard and I got there and I learned stuff along the way, and I made the Olympics. And so, like, I sort of thought about it in the same way. Well, I have a brain injury. There are memory problems and concentration problems and that sort of thing. But if I did that as a veggie PE class, if a veggie PE girl could make the Olympics, then the brain injured girl can get a PhD.
Yeah. So it sounds like you kind of reflect and use your experiences in sport to remind you of the things that you're capable of doing and ways of moving forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you mentioned this idea of growth, and I'm wondering if you can expand or articulate on how you feel that you've maybe grown as a consequence of either, your traumatic brain injury, or just some of the challenges that you've gone through sport.
Yeah, I guess it's all tied up with meaning. Like, once you can ascribe a meaning to it, like, I it, I don't know whether this is a meaning, but I look back on our result in Beijing, and I ascribe a meaning to it now, and that is, if I had won gold back then, I would have married the guy who I was engaged to at the time, and probably had a kid with him, and probably be divorced by now. And you know, I would have never met my now husband and had my son.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I had won gold then, I wouldn't have these wonderful things that I have now. And so that's a way of, I guess, ascribing meaning to something which makes it easier to deal with.
Yeah.
And then in terms of my brain injury and my huge accident that ended my career, it was a little bit harder to make meaning out of that. But I feel like, you know, these past 10 years, you know, I've had this journey through, you know, revisiting my psychology education and ending up with a PhD and studying positive psychology, especially where it intersects with education, and, you know, looking at kids that age, in the adolescent age group, where I feel like I had so much personal growth in my life. And maybe, you know, at the moment, this is what I'm doing at the moment, is trying to bring together my knowledge and experience in a way that can teach and help that age group, or maybe a little bit higher than that age group, you know, through in their sport. And, you know, I want to shortcut all of the stuff that I learned in sport.
Right.
It helps you at, you know, with your resilience, performance and well-being, and sets up the foundations for your life.
Yeah. So, you know, given all of these experiences, in some ways, it sounds like they contribute to your ability now to share those experiences, to provide that education to youth. Almost like, you know, if they could go back in time and have the benefit of the experience that you have, but now you have that ability to share that knowledge and information based on the experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Would maybe on that note, you can offer or suggest any piece of advice to an injured athlete, and what that might be?
Only control the controllable.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's easier said than done, but it takes practice. And, you know, like, I think it's okay to fall in a hole, as long as you can, you know that you can climb your way back out when it's time.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there's something to being allowed to fall in the hole and just wallow there for a little bit. Like, I remember after my accident, like my really bad accident, my now husband was saying, you know, come on, Amber, it's like, it's been 6 months, you know, don't you think you can, don't you think you should stop thinking about it and stop ruminating on it and just, you know, get on with the job? And I'm like, no, I am not over it yet. This is a shit thing that's happened to me.
Yeah.
And I feel like you need to validate my feelings in letting me be in the hole. I can come out, I will climb out, just give me time to be down here and just go away.
Yeah. So having the time just to you know, go through the emotions that one experiences is important.
Yeah, I mean, that was important for that accident. That was an accident that was career ending, and, you know, required a big shift in what I was doing. But if I had done that, if I had remained in the hole after the bike accident 100 days before the Athens Olympics, I wouldn't have made the start line at Athens. So you do, you know, it is particular to the situation, but I think a lot of people around an injured athlete might think it's all about quick, get out of the hole, quick, move on, you know. And if you force that, it invalidates their feelings of like, yeah, this is shit. I'm really sorry that this happened to you. And yeah,
Yeah.
I
So getting those feelings legitimized from others can be helpful, it sounds like.
yeah, it almost helps you move on. Like once you have the legitimization or the acknowledgement that you know, this is crappy. This must be really hard for you.
Right.
Like that makes it easier to move on, or at least it did for me in that situation with that injury.
Yeah. So would you say it's important for athletes to get certain types of support for their injury recovery?
Oh yeah, if I couldn't imagine getting through the things that I did without having support, like beyond injury, like yeah, but especially injury,
Yeah.
you know, having the right medical support, familial support, friendship support, teammate support, coach support. I managed to get through without that last one, but you know, that's another story.
Yeah. Um, well, and you've talked about you know, some of the different, I guess, facets of your performance and your experience, and certainly it sounds like that support is instrumental. Would you say there are any benefits to injury? I mean, we talked a little bit about, or you mentioned that idea of growth and sort of how you've, I guess, worked to experience it. Would you say there are benefits, or maybe I don't know if that's the right descriptor or characterization?
Um, I I'm not sure. I you know I'm particularly not sure about my injuries, especially the big ones. Definitely the smaller injuries and the pain and that sort of management, I think made me a smarter athlete. But and also it gave me like eventually it gave me the confidence to you know to know my body, to have the insight and to speak up when it was needed and that sort of thing. Um, but also I saw it so many times in other people, especially because this rib injury was the really common injury in rowing, that like a lot of the people that were they always seemed to be injured with, you know, they would always have a rowing stress fracture, and you just, you know, they might be training in another state and you would hear about them and go, oh yeah, you know, I'll just write her off for nationals coming up, and then at nationals she would be incredibly strong. So like it didn't really seem to correlate. Like that's what I learned from watching other people deal with these rib stress fractures, these 6 to 8 week injuries throughout my career, is that you couldn't ever ascribe them as a decisive factor in somebody
Yeah.
else's.
Yeah. It also sounds though like, would you say people are quick to write people off, maybe prematurely, or you know that?
Well, yeah, as an athlete, as a competitor against them, you know, you wanted to ascribe yourself something that would give you an advantage on the when you were on the course
Sure.
racing your race. But um, yeah, so but maybe I did it a little bit too easily, and I learnt after a little while to that a 6 to 8 week injury, while bad and while you miss a fair bit of training, especially in rowing from that, it wasn't a huge performance decrease that you maybe had hoped for in your competitors at least.
Right, right. I just want to say thanks for sharing all your experiences and insights, Amber. And obviously you have a wealth of experience and have competed at such a high level so consistently or over a long period of time. So I know your comments will certainly resonate with anyone who watches our discussion. So thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
No problem. Well, I always find it so easy to speak to you. We've been speaking for a long time now.
Yeah, certainly enjoy our conversation, and you know, it's nice to have the chance to get back in touch with certainly my Australian experiences, and yeah,
And
thank
you
you.
understand my accent.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Thanks for taking the time to speak.
That's right. And thank you very much for everything you've done of late as well.